When Ford pulled the cover off the 2005 Ford GT, the room didn't just gasp, they time traveled. It was a jaw dropping resurrection of the iconic GT40, a car that once humbled Ferrari at Le Mans and defined American racing dominance in the 1960s. But the 2005 GT wasn't just a tribute, it was a modern supercar born from passion, nostalgia, and some good old fashioned Ford rebellion. We're going to take a quick look at what made this car come to be and then take it over to our test track to see how it handles against cars we've previously tested. So join me on this adventure and we'll see what's in store. The early 2000s were a reflective time for Ford. Its 100th anniversary was approaching, and the Blue Oval wanted to do more than just throw a party. Executives wanted something special, a rolling testament to the company's racing soul. So they turned to the one car that encapsulated Ford's most legendary motorsport triumph, the GT40. The GT40 had crushed Ferrari at Le Mans 4 years in a row, from 1966 to 1969, thanks to Henry Ford II's famous grudge-fueled campaign. But reviving a legend like that isn't easy. Get it wrong and you ruin a legacy. Get it right and you make history again. Ford had already dabbled with the idea of creating a tribute car in the project that created the GT90, which just remained as a prototype. And that car was a much more modernized version that never came to fruition. But the Ford GT was something separate and something different. It all started as a secret skunkworks project. Ford's SVT, or Special Vehicle Team, began quietly sketching out what a modern GT40 might look like. They called it the GT40 concept. And when it debuted at the 2002 Detroit Auto Show, it nearly blew the roof off Cabo Hall. The design was pitch perfect, low, wide, and dripping in retro attitude. But the underpinnings were completely modern, built for the 21st century road warrior. The public reaction was electric. Ford had no choice but to greenlight production. But there was a catch. They had less than 16 months to go from concept to a working road-ready supercar. The GT needed to be ready in time for the company's centennial anniversary in 2003. Unlike the 1960s predecessor, which was a pure race car, the 2005 GT had to meet modern safety standards, emissions regulations, and still deliver Ferrari-slaying performance. At its heart was a 5.4-liter supercharged V8, mid-mounted, producing 550 horsepower and 500 foot-pounds of torque. It was mated to a Ricardo 6-speed manual transmission, sending all that power to the rear wheels with no traction control. Just guts, skills, and a prayer. The chassis of the Ford GT was an aluminum space frame with double wishbone suspension. It wasn't just fast, it was refined, planted, and razor sharp. It could get from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just over 3.3 seconds and had a top speed of 205 miles per hour. This wasn't just a toy, it was a missile cloaked in retro skin. And speaking of that skin, Ford's design team didn't simply replicate the old GT40. They scaled it up and modernized it. The original GT40 was only 40 inches tall, which is part of where it got that name. The modern version ended up with modern aerodynamics, and they kept it pure. Every vent, scoop, and curve was functional and faithful. Ford ended up building 4,038 GTs between 2005 and 2006, and every single one became an instant classic. They didn't just slap one on every showroom floor looking for mass production. This was a passion project. Everyone was sold with pride. And the car delivered. The GT wasn't just fast, it had a soul. It was loud, raw, and mechanical. It was a car that demanded respect and rewarded bravery. In a world filling up with paddle shift vehicles and driving aids, the GT was analog nirvana. The 2005 Ford GT wasn't created to chase profit margins. It wasn't created to fill a gap in the lineup. It was made because people inside Ford loved cars, loved history, and wanted to show the world what a company could do when it stopped worrying about bean counters. It was a car built with heart and a nod to the day that Ford beat Ferrari at its own game. And honestly, that story never gets old. If you've made it this far, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. But let's go ahead and bring this over to our test track and see where it lands on our leaderboard. Thanks to the 1.57 update, this car is now able to be engine swapped with the Windsor engine from the Maverick, but we're going to go ahead and take it around with its original engine first. This car fully built out ends up with 792.7 performance points and will produce 874 horsepower and 615 foot-pounds of torque. The car hits the scales at 2,493 pounds and can hit a top speed of around 238 miles per hour. Now, the engine swap version is quicker, but I'm going to tell you up front, I actually prefer this version of the car. And part of the reason is because the performance points being around 800 puts you in a good spot to fit into most of the GT series races when you're doing Group 3 and Group 4. The stock engine ends up being supercharged and will end up wearing the tires at about 20% to the front and 25% to the rear. We were basically out of the fuel at the end of the 3 laps, so you do have to refuel this car relatively frequently. You could probably get a little bit more grip out of it and preserve the tires as well by adding a little bit more aerodynamics to it and a little bit more downforce. But I actually liked the way this car felt. It feels very balanced, and it will push a little bit if you go into the corner too hot, but it didn't really step out coming out, so again, it's a really nicely balanced car. And in all honesty, I prefer the way this factory engine sounds when racing it. We ended up crossing the line at 1 minute 50 seconds, .637, which put it right behind the Bugatti Veyron and just in front of the Dodge Challenger SRT Demon. But let's go ahead and engine swap it and see how that car handles. Dropping the Windsor motor into the Ford GT increases the performance quite a bit. It ends up with 534 more horsepower and 402 more foot-pounds of torque, bringing the total horsepower to 1,408 and the torque to 1,018. Now this extra torque and horsepower will cause extra punishment to the rear tires as well. We saw the same 20% wear to the front tires and about 50% wear to the rear. And although it still was able to get 3 laps, you're flat out of gas on 3 laps, whereas the stock engine allows you a little bit of wiggle room. The weight is actually a little bit less. It drops 169 pounds, bringing the total weight to 2,324 pounds. And the top speed of the car is drastically increased to 283 miles per hour, which is quite quick. Now, I do still prefer the factory engine. This car just kind of ends up feeling like a sideshow instead of being a more serious race car. And with the performance points jumping up to 840, you're going to end up having to reduce the power for most races. And when you're doing that, the car is still terrible on gas. So you're going to lose a lot of the time that you end up gaining by having to refuel this thing or replace those rear tires. So I still do prefer the factory engine, even though this is a fun option. But we ended up crossing the line at 1 minute 48.214 seconds. That put it right behind the Aston Martin Vantage and just in front of the engine swapped Nismo 400R. So it's a very competitive car, but it will punish the fuel and the tires, and I actually just prefer the sound of the other engine. But thank you for watching, and stay clean out there.